my next question to Manny. Manny, as we all know, many countries around the world have announced stimulus package ranging from 10 to 22% of their GDPs. The Indian government also announced a $28 billion US dollar fiscal package, which is roughly 10% of our GDP. However, the effective fiscal cost is only 1% of GDP. Do you feel that these stimulus packages will accelerate the economic growth going forward? How do you find that effect of the rating on the different countries when these kind of countries are giving fiscal packages? And recently what we have seen that Moody has downgraded India from Baa2 to Baa3 this week. So what will be the impact on India in terms of getting FI and FDI inflow? So what do you read out of all these things? Manny.
Thank you for the question, Sanjay. Look, the short answer about the rating situation is don't worry about it. Ratings agencies are notorious in terms of missing the ball on things. They're lagging indicators of things, and frankly, the risk from not doing enough, not doing more, given what I consider a generational opportunity for India in a number of sectors, far outweighs a ratings downgrade from a Moody's or an S&P. So you have to put the credit downgrade of India in the context of what is happening in the developed world, right? In the developed world, you have the US Fed, which is out buying junk bond ETFs, okay, going just way out on the curve, financing paper from Boeing and Ford and whatnot. And then in Japan, you have the Bank of Japan, whose stimulus package is close to 25% of GDP. And they're just not even pretending anymore. They're just going and buying stocks in the stock market. And they still can't get any growth, and they still have negative yields. So I think for India to worry too much about running up the deficit, et cetera, at this point, I think is foolish. The most important thing the world needs is growth. And India has unique levers for growth. And we cannot lose sight of that. The other thing that I think the ratings agencies don't consider is the move in crude. India is a oil-dependent economy. It's one of the few large economies remaining in the world that are net oil importers. And I think the advantage to both the trade deficit and the fact that CPI stays in check when crude comes down, I think are huge tailwinds behind India's back. And I think to a large extent, the Indian government gets that, the RBI gets that. If you think about 2008, the RBI cut the repo rate from, it was over 9% at one point, I think about 9% to 4.75%. And it took them 7 months to do that. And CPI at the time in India was close to 10%, all right? Now you look at what they've done already entering the COVID crisis, the repo rate in India was 4%. They'd already cut it 100 basis points. And inflation in India is more or less, non-existent, if not well contained. So, and thanks in some part to crude. So I think the ratings thing, I wouldn't worry about it. I think the RBI is, that's it. I think the bigger thing that I worry about with India, rather than running up its deficit or its credit downgrade, is that it will miss a generational opportunity. And it is something that, as you know, I feel extremely strongly about. I think India has an opportunity to be the next manufacturing powerhouse of the world. And we are not doing enough. Even the stuff that the Modi government is doing is not getting the kind of megaphone or kind of publicity that it deserves among corporates, et cetera. I mean, to reiterate the point that Peter and Manraj made, already people, large corporates, Nike and automotive companies and apparel companies, electronics makers, they were already talking about diversifying their supply chains away from China, particularly the ones that are over-indexed to China, because of the trade war. And now with everything that's happened with COVID, people have realized that they cannot be 60, 70% indexed to China. And even a small move away from that is huge for a country like India. I mean, if you think about China versus India, China does about $2 trillion a year in exports. India does less than 20% of that, okay? Both countries have roughly 1.4 billion people. The Indian demographic, if anything, is younger than the Chinese demographic. So we have a lot of young people that can do these things, take these jobs. And wages are, in India are comparable to what they are in China. So I think the problem is that becoming a manufacturing hub for large international companies is not about cheap wages. That's what we've seen from the example of the other Southeast Asian tigers. It's about land reform. It's about labor reform. It's about credible deregulation. And India is making steps in that direction. For example, in the last budget, the finance minister cut the tax rate. But people don't believe it. And there's just widespread skepticism around it, which is that it will not last and they will botch up the execution. And it really pains me when we talk to corporates in vertical after vertical, and we look at where supply chains are, how they're retooling themselves, and India is not in the top 3 destinations. So let me tell you, in electronics, okay, every dollar that's moving out of China is going to, these are the top 3 countries by category. Every dollar is going to Thailand, Vietnam, Taiwan, Singapore. This is for top 4. In textiles, it's going to Vietnam, Indonesia, Laos, and Thailand. In automotive, it's going to Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Mexico. India is not in the picture. India needs to be in the picture.
What do you think India can do differently in order to boost the economy and attract more foreign investors? And according to you, what are the stumbling blocks for the global investor to invest in India? Like what you said is like India need to do a lot of things are happened by other Asian countries. What is your view on that? What should India do differently in terms of getting the economic growth accelerate and getting the more money from the foreign investors?
I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, reform has to be credible. And, it's not just about wages. It's not just about labor force. If I'm Nike and I'm making an investment decision about where I should start my next plant, and that plant will be there for the next 30 years, I have to know that the next government that comes along will not hold up my permit. The next government that comes along will not unionize my labor force or weaponize my labor force. They will not jack up taxes on me. I will be protected by some sort of judicial system. And those are the things that historically India has fumbled on, right? I mean, one regime comes in, introduces a certain set of measures, approves some projects, and the next regime comes in, everything is dead, come back to us, reapply. That leaves a very bad taste in the mouth, right? Nobody wants to deal with that. So, and particularly when the difference is China, where once they give you an approval for something, because it is so top down and it is driven by, the machinery is well oiled. Once they give it to you, it's yours. So I think India has to. This is really a credibility issue, and it's about really advertising to the international community that India is open for business. So I think, in a nutshell, that's sort of obviously this is a complicated topic and one that, as you know, I feel very strongly about. But in a nutshell, I think that's what India needs to do. Now, the other thing that I will say is that in the post-COVID world, there are certain themes that have now taken root where India has a natural skill set. And I think we're going to see India and Indian companies do pretty well in certain areas. Now I'm thinking of things like, work from home, remote education, telemedicine, esports, things that are going to become a bigger part. A lot of stuff in the healthcare side. These are all areas where India has historically had skill. Whether it's software, whether it's medicine, whether it's pharma, and so I think India is well positioned to take a lot of share in things that are now emerging in the post-COVID world.
So like Manny, I take your last question and then I go to other, like what you said is like a lot of business models are getting changed, like what we have seen in recent past, that work from home, a lot of like OTT players shopping online. So do you feel this kind of trend is going to continue, or it's really sustainable?
I mean, look, time will tell. I mean, you need a crystal ball to figure some things out. But what I will say is that when you think about how some of the great discoveries of the world have happened, penicillin, for example, you're in the middle of a war and then you need something, and a guy comes up with penicillin, you try it, and now you revolutionize something. I think what COVID has done is it has shown to us how a different way of life is possible. Now, at the end of the day, will people stop eating in restaurants and stop flying and stop? I don't think so, right? At the end of the day, people are social, they want to interact. But we've learned, for example, that you don't have to sit in an office for 5 days a week or 12 hours a day. You can be just as productive or more productive sitting at home. Look at an event like this, right? We have people from all over the world and we're all dialed in, and this is a very productive way to do it. Same thing with telemedicine, right? Up until 3 months ago, I think there was some hesitation. People don't want to go on the app. People are reluctant to do a consult over a virtual platform with a doctor. Well, now you don't have a choice, right? So if you need to talk to a doctor, well, you better figure it out, right? So we're seeing huge spikes all over the world, including in India. Telemedicine consults are going up, 8x, 10x, because people have to do it. And once you do it, you realize it's not that hard. It's very convenient, and in some ways, it should become a part of your life. So I think those changes we're not going back on, right? Things we've realized actually make our life better. These tools, these technologies, I think those are here to stay.
Thank you, Manny. So can I request any of my panelists if they would like to ask anything?
Yes, Sanjay bhai, a great session so far. You are moderating fantastically well, and I think you have covered most of the questions.
And one more request before you speak, Manny. I think you can speak Hindi. So there are a lot of participants who would like to, love to hear you for 5 minutes, 2 minutes. If you can have your view in Hindi, it can be great. Actually, I requested Manraj sir also. He said, Sanjay, my Hindi is horrible, so please don't disturb me. Either you're the best guy, if you can really, Manraj ji, before you speak.
मैनी को मैं हिंदी में ही मैनी सर को पूछ रहा हूँ ये क्वेश्चन. अगर आप समझे तो क्वेश्चन इंग्लिश में है, पर आप हिंदी में रिप्लाई दे सकते हैं. What are the inflationary consequences of the large stimulus packages which are given the countries world over, and why we in India are bothering so much about the, as you rightly said, about the fiscal deficit and rating? So, okay, as far as India is concerned, it is going safe. But what are the consequences to some of these large countries of the world when they are just distributing the money? This is one very important question to you, Mr. Manny.
Inflation ka dekhiye, so far, we see no signs of inflation, right, in the US. And I think a large part of that has to do with the employment picture. So, agar aapke 20 million, 25 million log unemployed hain, ghar baithe hain, तो आप उनको अगर हाथ में पैसा भी पकड़ा रहे हो, तो वो does not feed into systemic inflation, right? And so I think because of where the global demand picture is, and clearly the world economy has gone through a huge exogenous shock, we see no signs of systemic inflation. Part of that is the unemployment picture, which has again ratcheted up. Even when unemployment in the US was at historic lows, 3%, 4% unemployment थी जब, तब भी inflation US में नहीं दिख रहा था. तो अब तो दिखने का सवाल ही नहीं है, right? So inflation in the US has not been a problem, and the question is why, right? तो इसके दो reasons हैं कि inflation हमें क्यों नहीं दिखती है US में. एक reason structural है. Structural reason ये है कि जब से चाइना वर्ल्ड इकोनॉमी में प्लेयर बना है, यूएस और चाइना के बीच में बहुत एक कन्वीनियंट टिट फॉर टैट टाइप की रिलेशनशिप है. चाइना जो है उसने यूएस का डेफिसिट फाइनेंस किया है. China owns almost 20% of outstanding US Treasury issuance is sitting with China. And in the process, China has used its currency, you can argue manipulated currency, and has provided cheap goods into the US market, right? So बहुत एक symbiotic relationship दोनों में रही है, जहाँ US के deficit China finance करता है, और in return US की सारी manufacturing China, and that has put a lid on prices. The other thing is technology. Technology has kept prices low. जो काम 10 लोग किया करते थे, वो Amazon के warehouse में 2 लोग और 2 robot करते हैं. और उससे क्या है कि बहुत चीजों की price, it keeps a lid on prices, right? Prices don't go up. So I think ये structural reasons हैं क्यों inflation नहीं है वर्ल्ड में. अब आप उसमें अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट ऐड करिए तो डिमांड साइड गेट सॉफ्ट, तो अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट तो इन्फ्लेशन और कम हो जाती है. एंड द थर्ड थिंग इज देयर इज अ मेजरमेंट आर्टिफैक्ट. द वे दैट CPI and PPI is measured in the US, it is a basket of goods and services. उसमें क्या है कि फूड जैसी चीजें, अपैरल, फुटवेयर, इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स, इन चीजों का बहुत बड़ा वेट है, disproportionate to how much we spend on them. So जहां prices बढ़ रही हैं US में, they are in things like education. The cost of education in the US has gone up tenfold in the last 30 years. Rents have gone up much, much faster, right? Almost a double-digit clip compared to the prices of shoes or food. A pair of shoes actually costs less today than it did 30 years ago. And I think it's an artifact of measurement that the index overweights into goods whose prices have been kept low because of China and because of technology. So I think CPI reading जो है वो ऊपर नहीं जाने वाली है, और because CPI वगैरह कंटेन रहेंगे, डेवलप्ड वर्ल्ड में इन्फ्लेशन नहीं होगी, और इंडिया के लिए प्लस क्रूड लो है. तो for all of these reasons, inflation is not on the scene despite all the money printing. Now that doesn't mean that that will not change in 5 years, but in the near term, for us to worry about something that will kill us in 5 years and miss the opportunity that we have today, I think that will be real pity for India.
धन्यवाद, आपने हिंदी में इतना अच्छा बोला.
Sanjay, just one question I have, Anil here.
Yeah, please, Anil ji.
I think you all spoke about the shale gas and the oil industry going down. What is your outlook on renewable in India, especially solar?
Manny, you can take it.
Yeah, so I'll take that really quickly because I have to run in about 5 minutes. But the outlook for renewables is fantastic. And Peter and I actually, when I'm sure you'll remember, Peter, this is 12, 13 years ago at this point, we were short a lot of solar stocks in the US. Companies like, half those companies don't even exist anymore, because at the time you had to pay $4 per kilowatt hour, if I remember right, for polycrystalline silicon modules. And I think the number was $1 a kilowatt hour for thin film, which First Solar was making. Now you look 13, 14 years later, those prices have been cut by a factor of 20, okay? And the Chinese have had obviously no small part to play in that, to a point today where in many, many countries, renewables are cost competitive compared to traditional sources of power. And certainly in the US, that's true. Solar power is cheaper today than conventional other forms of energy. So I think solar has a huge market in India. The combination of, it's a country that gets a lot of sun, module prices are down, we have cheap labor, which, a lot of the cost of these projects is installation and wages, just paying for labor costs. So all of those factors come together. I think India should do more in the renewable side. The only thing that we have to watch out for is the grid. The Indian grid may not be ready, but on the other hand, India is up until very recently, was a power-starved country, power-hungry country. There are still places in India that have large power cuts every day, 2-3 घंटा. आज भी इंडिया में कई एरियाज हैं जहां बिजली जाती है, वो नहीं होना चाहिए. And I think solar is the solution. The government really must do more to encourage that.
Okay, we will take a question from the audience. Mr. Vicky Oswal. Vicky, you can unmute yourself and ask your question, please. Mr. Vicky Oswal.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. We can hear you.
Firstly, heartiest congratulations, Sanjay bhai. And
Thank you.
this has been a successful webinar, because to get in the webinar, I took nearly about 10 to 15 minutes to get the access.
Yeah.
Sir, my two questions would be, I'm into real estate. So what would be the 2 key points you would suggest for a real estate developer to sustain 1 or 2 years? And is it the right time to get into stock market for investments?
So who would like to take this question?
Manny, I think. Manny. Mr. Manny.
सबसे मुश्किल मुझे दे दो, है ना?
Yes, absolutely. और हिंदी में ही जवाब दो इसका, because all the builders would love to listen in Hindi, please.
देखो, रियल एस्टेट मेरी कोई इसमें कोई एक्सपर्टीज वगैरह नहीं है, लेकिन what you know, I followed the situation in India, and I think I would reiterate the advice that people like Uday Kotak are giving the real estate sector in India, which is, look, at some point, India has enough structural demand, right? It is a young country, household formation is strong, and you know, it is compared to, for example, the US, where home ownership numbers are very high. In India, that is not the case. India has a long runway for home ownership. So if you look at it structurally, India has a very good housing story. The other thing is that in India, a lot of buying has happened with cash. And so the penetration of mortgage products in India is very low, right? In the US, 70-75% people, jo naya housing stock, when people buy it, is through some kind of financial product, mortgage, etc. India mein bahut under-penetrated hai. India mein aaj bhi penetration of financial products, mortgages is something like 10 or 15%. And as that number goes up, affordability improves, because instead of ponying up the entire amount in cash up front, you're able to finance it, and particularly now at attractive rates because of, you know, what rates have done. So the structural story for Indian housing is very sound. I think the whole sector is going through, you know, some sins of the past, unfinished projects, some bad corporate governance on the part of certain players, regulatory cleanup. And I have to believe that when all of that is behind us, that Indian housing will be a growth sector for many years. And the advice that I would give somebody in the real estate business is basically what people like Uday Kotak have said, which is don't hang on to inventory. At some point, it's a market, right? So the market clears at some price, and let price discovery happen, even if that means you have to, you know, sell inventory at slightly lower prices. You know, get your liquidity, and then there will always be the next project. So that's as far as real estate goes, with the caveat that I'm not, you know, I have no special expertise.
Thank you. Yeah,
now,
Mr.
the other
Manny.
question, in terms of markets and stocks, like everybody said, U.S. market is not especially expensive. I think you have to pick your sectors. In the Indian market, I think the crown jewels of the Indian public markets, to me, are our private sector financials. And they are very cheap. And so if you're looking to buy one thing in India, I'm a big fan of India's private sector financials. I think they are fantastic. They're like the FANGs. They have fantastic business models. There are no banks like HDFC and Axis and Kotak and ICICI anywhere in the world. And so if you want a long-term investment in the Indian equity market, private financials is where I would go.
Thank you, Manny.
Thank you. We have one Mr. Jayesh Kala, who is the coordinator from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India Western Regional Council. Jayesh, are you there? Jayesh, can you unmute yourself?
Yes.
Yeah, please go on. We invite you to speak.
Yeah, thank you. It's really a wonderful session kept by you. And it is indeed a positive frame of mind, and the speakers have spoken in the way about the global economy and the effect post-COVID. It is indeed a very good interactive session, and I fully thank you, Ajmera ji, Sanjay Dangi ji, and entire team of JITO and JPF for organizing this event. And on behalf of WIRC, I really feeling overwhelmed by attending this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jayesh ji.